Welcome to this week's message from Dr. Gerald Mann. Dr. Mann is the senior pastor at the Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas. Let's join the Riverbend family for this week's message.
I'm doing a series of, I guess what some people would call sermons. I call them confessionals. I don't look at preaching as somebody with great knowledge preaching down to people who are, weak in knowledge. I've always thought of myself as one beggar telling other beggars where he's found bread. I'm doing a series called The Things That Make for Peace. Jesus said one time, if you only knew the things that make for peace. And today, as a scriptural background, I'm going to look at Luke 15. I won't read the whole chapter to you. Let me summarize it for you. It starts with Jesus teaching, and all of these outcasts, all of these people who are not religious and are not expected to be religious, are flocking to him. And the ministers, the priests, see it, and they don't like it. And they start grumbling because Jesus is associating with a bad crowd. And Jesus turns to them and tells them three stories. One is the story of the lost sheep. He said, suppose a shepherd has 100 sheep and he loses one of them. He leaves the 99, and he goes and he searches until he finds the lost lamb. And when he finds it, he throws it over his shoulders, and he rushes home and he throws a party and calls all of his friends to celebrate the fact that the lost lamb has been found. That's the way they celebrate in heaven when one outcast comes to God. He said, suppose there's a woman who has 10 coins and she loses one of them. She lights a lamp and lights up the house. She sweeps the floor. She turns over everything. She searches until she finds the coin. And when she finds it, she calls all of her friends and throws a party. So that's the way the angels celebrate in heaven when one of these little ones comes to God. And then he said, there was once a man who had 2 sons. And the young son said to him, Father, I want to go and make my mark now. Give me my inheritance. Let me go. This is dull around here. He takes all the money. He goes, and in short order, he wastes everything he has. He's lost everything. And he's a Jew feeding pigs for a farmer. And as he looks at the pigs eating one day, he realizes that his father's slaves eat better than that. And Jesus said he came to himself, and he started back home to the father. But while he was still a long way off, the father saw him. And he ran and fell upon his neck and showered him with kisses. And he said, Father, I deserve to be a slave. Make me a slave. He said, no, no, no. You're going to be a son. And he tells his servants, go get a robe and go get a ring and go get sandals and dress him up and go kill the fatted calf. And they had a party. And while they were celebrating, the other son, the older one, who had stayed home all of his life and had done everything properly, came and said, what's going on in there? And one of the slaves said, well, your brother came home and he's throwing a party to celebrate. And he stood out there sulking, and the father comes out and begs him to come to the party. And he says, no, you never even gave me and my friends a goat to celebrate. And now you've killed a fatted calf, and you're having a party for this wastrel. And it ends with the father telling the son, don't you understand? Your father was, your brother was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found. We had to celebrate. The things that make for peace, part 2. Jesus promised the last night he was with his disciples that he would not leave them alone. He said, I'm going away, I'm going to die, but I'm going to come back in a spiritual form, and I'm going to live inside you. And what you're going to feel is peace. You're going to feel that inner harmony, to know that everything is okay. And last Sunday, I confessed to you that in the 40 years of my journey in trying to become a Christian, very seldom have I had that sense of inner peace. It is not a regular experience for me. And that has haunted me over the years because I desperately yearn for that. I haven't had it. And I talked about how I felt that the first step to inner peace is to accept some realistic truths about yourself. We have to get rid of some of our illusions of grandeur and perfection and immortality. And after doing that sermon, I got a bunch of notes this week from many of you saying, Gerald, are you okay? I mean, it was like, has our pastor finally lost it? I want you to know, yeah, I'm really okay. In fact, I've had a wonderful week. In fact, I've had a week of peacefulness. Everything I planned went wrong. But I didn't go wrong. And that's the marvelous thing about it. And I don't know, this week may be entirely different. But last week was a wonderful week. And I am okay. In fact, I discovered another thing about peace. We not only need to accept the truth about ourselves, but we need to accept the truth about God. We talk a lot about it up here in our heads, but we need to feel it down here. Jesus, in those 3 stories, told 2 revolutionary things about God that no one had ever heard before. And even today, even in churches, people do not realize or feel down here what Jesus said about God. 2 astounding, remarkable things about God that were revolutionary. He told in those 3 stories. And I think that in order to be on our way toward peace, we have to accept down here every day those 2 wonderful truths. Let me talk about them. The first thing Jesus tells us is that God is a God of compulsive affection. God has to love us. God doesn't love us because He wants to. He loves us because it's His nature. There was an old country song I danced 1,000 miles to when I was a kid where the guy wails out, I can't stop loving you. Anybody ever heard that? I've made up my mind. And as crude, as crass, and earthy as that is the theme that Jesus taught about God. God cannot stop loving us. He doesn't choose to love us. It's of His nature. God is driven to... Look at those 3 stories. The shepherd has 100 sheep. He loses 1. What does he do? He leaves the 99, and he goes and looks for the 1. He's got to have them all. 99 is not enough. He wants every one of us, and He won't stop. It doesn't say He searched till dark. It says He searched until He found him. And the woman who lost the coin, same thing. She swept, she lit the lantern. She turned everything upside down. She didn't search until it was no longer rational to search. She searched until what? She found it. God is a kind of God who doesn't stop. He's always after us. Francis Thompson called Him the Hound of Heaven, and he wrote this poem about God as the great bull mastiff who chased Him. And Francis Thompson, as you know, was a drug addict and lived in the dregs of London and was converted before they had all the techniques because God was the Hound of Heaven who would not stop chasing him. God can't stop loving us. He is a God of compulsive affection. Augustine says, God, Thou hast created us for Thyself, and we are restless until we find our rest in Thee. There is no way to have peace and run from God. Peace means letting God find you. What I've discovered is that one of the reasons I haven't had any peace is that I've sort of been like that sheep who nibbled himself. The sheep wasn't bad. He was eating a dandelion here and grass over there, and a little bit over there and a little bit over there, and he just kept following in his nose, nibbling after good things, and finally he turned around and, he was lost. I do that. Been doing that all my life. Not chasing after bad things, but after good things. Leaving the flock. And I can identify with that coin. The coin was valuable. It just wasn't being spent on the right thing. It was just lying there. And I can identify with that young son. Oh, I don't really think he was a bad guy. I think all of us like to make him a bad guy. I think he was young. He was idealistic. He wanted to go conquer the world. What he was really saying is, Dad, you're a great person. And it's hard to live in your shadow. And I want to go and actualize myself. I want to go meet my potential. Give me my part and let me go. I want to go out and conquer the world. And the father let him go. And when he comes back, the father doesn't even wait for him to get home. He runs and showers him with kisses and makes him a son. He says, I want to be a slave. You're going to be a son. Kills the fatted calf. Somebody said the most remarkable words Jesus ever said about God were those two little words when he talked about the Father, who is God. He ran to find his son. God is a God of compulsive affection. And when the older boy won't go in and he stands out there sulking, it says he came out and he begged. Do you understand how revolutionary that was? In the days which Jesus spoke, a son who rebelled against his father could be stoned to death. It's capital crime. You hear all this talk about how they could stone homosexuals and adulterers. They could also execute a rebellious child. It was absolutely unthinkable that a father would go in search of a rebellious son. It was absolutely unthinkable that a father would come out and beg a pouting child to come to the party. Those were images that were beyond anything those people had ever heard. That's who God is, my friends. And the only way to peace is to realize that God loves you too much to let you be separated from Him and to let you feel comfortable about it. I came to realize that one of the reasons I've been so troubled is not because God is absent from my life, but because He's present. God loves me too much to let me be separated from His will and be comfortable about it at the same time. The reason so many people are so unhappy in our world is because they're not in touch with the Father. If you only knew the things that made for peace, you would know that God loves you too much to let you be both comfortable and out of His will. First remarkable thing, God is a God of compulsive affection. The second truth about God in those three stories is that God is a God of compulsive gladness, celebration. Look at those three stories. What happens when the shepherd finds the sheep? Throws a party. When the woman finds the coin, throws a party. When the father finds the son, throws a party. God is a God who has to celebrate. He's a God of joy. He's not a God who goes around with a long face and a stern look on his eyebrow, waiting for you to commit some sin so He can zap you. God is a God of joy. And He wants to share His aliveness and His joy with us. I have never been able to figure out why in the church we get the notion that anything that's very much fun has got to be sinful. But I grew up that way. We had a little group in teenagers, and we were having parties, and we were having a big time, and all the preachers got together to try to stop it, and the reason was because we were having a good time. Where did we get that notion? It was revolutionary. God is a God of compulsive celebration. He throws parties. What does that have to do with peace? Simply this. Look at the older son. The older son is the only one in the group that doesn't catch that God is a God of celebration. The older son reminds me of people I've seen in the church over the years who are good and darn mad about it. I keep all the rules. Don't drink it, don't. I'm straight and I'm mad about it. Grim-faced, tight-lipped, slump-shouldered. They're like the elder son who thought the only way I can ever have any joy is never to relax, to stay clenched and to stay on top and keep every little rule and make sure I don't break it. And he missed the whole concept of joy. I've never been able to identify with him until this week. Two things happened this past week that drove home this point to me about God being a God of joy. And one was that Lois and I were going to California anyway, and there's a wonderful lady who watches us on TV from Beverly Hills, and if I told you her name, you would know who she is. She was married to to a very famous movie star, and she said, if you ever come into California, let me know and come. We'd love to see you. So we told her we were coming. She invited us to dinner, and so we went. We checked in near Rodeo Drive, and Lois and I looked like American Gothic standing on Rodeo Drive. Nothing but Rolls Royces and Mercedes and BMWs. And we found out later the BMWs it's what the maids drive. And so we went at the appointed time to this beautiful home, Beverly Hills, to meet these famous people. And I knew they were believers. And we went in there in this lovely home. We had this lovely dinner. And in the course of the evening, we found out that both of these people had been through terrible tragedies and pain in their lives. And as they began to tell us about all the people they knew in that whole Hollywood scene, there was so much pain. And I thought I had come there, to be in the presence of, wow. And here they were saying, if only we could find somebody to give us some peace. And at one point, our hostess, I said to her, Beverly Hills is where everybody tries to be. She says, there's so much pleasure here and so little joy. So much pleasure, so little joy. And that really struck home to me that there's so many people in the world who are wanting to be somewhere else, wanting to be somebody else, wanting to make it to Beverly Hills, where everything is wonderful. And our biggest problem is that we don't find joy in being who we are. That was the elder son. He had no joy in being who he was. And so then I came back on the plane and I read a book that's zooming to the bestseller list in religious circles. It's by Philip Yancey. It's entitled, What's So Amazing About Grace? And I started reading that book, and the more I read it, the more I knew it's probably the best book written on grace in modern times, and the angrier I got. He wrote my book. He has things in there that are right out of my sermons. Over and over he says in the book, why doesn't somebody start a church and build a church on grace? Darn it, we've done it. Philip Yancey doesn't know about me. One time he defines grace. I'm getting a little excited. He says you can't define grace, you can only show grace, illustrate it. But he says, I will attempt one definition. Has any of you here ever heard this in the 20 years you've heard me preaching? Grace means, and I quote, this is what he writes in his book, it's on the jacket even. Grace means there's nothing you can ever do to make God love you more than he already does. And there's nothing you can ever do to make God love you less than he already... Yeah, you're all quoting with, that's my stuff. And I got angrier and angrier. And God said, you're going to preach on Luke 15, Gerald. You are the elder son. I've done grace. 60 people to 10,840 and counting. And I'm getting no credit. Never been invited to speak to the Southern Baptist Convention. Never been invited to speak to the Austin Baptist Association. They treat us like we're that illegitimate child or crazy aunt in the basement. And I didn't realize how much I had resented that. You see what all that spells is that Gerald has never come to find joy in just being who he is and being where he is. And to me, that's the step to peace. That who I am is not only okay with God, it pleases him. And who you are is not only okay, it's wonderful. And you only need to come to feel about yourself the way God feels about you. If you only knew the things that make for peace. The truth that God is a God of compulsive affection. God doesn't choose to love you. He has to. And God is a God of compulsive joy. It's not only okay to be who you are, it's downright wonderful. And God rejoices every time you come home to Him. Wow.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope this message was a real encouragement. For information on other audio tapes or books by Dr. Gerald Mann, please call 1-800-388-9500. Comments should be sent to Gerald Mann Ministries, Post Office Box 160-100, Austin, Texas 78716. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next week.